Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to December's webinar, which is rescheduled from November. As many of you signed up for the original November date, we're excited to finally be bringing you Who's in Charge, working with friends and former coworkers. Looks like people are slowly getting signed on, so we'll wait a few more minutes, and then once everyone's in, we'll get rolling. All right, and it looks like the attendees panel is kind of slowed down from people signing in, so we'll get rolling with today's webinar. Again, welcome to Who's in Charge, working with friends and former coworkers. A little bit about Great Lakes Center for Youth Development. We are a capacity building organization located in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. We are helping to build the Upper Peninsula to be a model community for youth, and we do this through building the capacity of nonprofits and promoting asset-based youth development. So that means we could do webinars like this, helping all nonprofits with management, which falls under that strengthening nonprofits area. Soon we'll be releasing our youth asset report for Marquette and Alger County. So we do surveys of youth. There's a bunch of ways we go about our work. So thank you for being a part of our mission. And we're excited to talk with you today about working with your friends and former coworkers. Our sponsors today are the Stations of Radio Results Network. You may have heard the commercial for this webinar on the radio. We want to thank them for a grant to help spread the word about our webinar series, and UPHP. UPHP has been a great partner to GLCYD, and they provide their tagline is coverage the Upper Peninsula deserves. So if you are looking for insurance needs, be sure to check out UPHP. And with that, I will pass it over to Chad, who will be leading today's webinar.
Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, everyone. I kind of want to echo what Victoria started off the webcast with is thanks for coming back because we had to reschedule in November. Actually, I was scheduled to do this webinar and I lost my voice. It's kind of difficult to do a webinar if you don't have a voice, so we had to reschedule it. So thank you for tuning back in and dealing with this topic. So we'll get right into it. The training objectives is we're going to talk about how to supervise or manage your friends and former coworkers, and then I have a little bit at the end too about what if you find yourself in the position of now being supervised by a friend or a former coworker, and how do you respond to that? But the bulk of it will be, what do? As we'll tackle both as a new supervisor, you're brand new into the position, or as an experienced one and have had problems in the past trying to manage those friends and former coworkers. So I just want to kind of start off with a story. Let's just pick a name. Charlene's worked for a long time at her organization. She has an opportunity for you get a promotion where she'll be switched from a kind of mainline or hands-on worker into the supervisory management role. And so, man, yeah, it's a promotion. She's worked hard for this. It's a pay increase, all that kind of wonderful stuff, decision making. So she takes it. But over the years, she's become very good friends with either outside of work with some people she works with or with her coworkers. They're very close. And now all of a sudden she is thrust into the position that now she has to be the one who assigns work, evaluates that work, and even gives performance reviews to all these people who for years she's worked shoulder to shoulder with. That is a tough situation for anyone. And how do you do that? And we see time and time again with organizations that it's a very tricky and tough subject, which doesn't always end well, because the number one thing is people don't know how to get themselves prepared for that transition and for that position and the responsibility of that, and how to do that in a safe way that balances how do you remain a friend to someone who you now supervise and have to keep accountable to get work done, and without yeah, we'll get into it. They're worried about the favoritism, et cetera, et cetera. So, but the first things first, if you find yourself, if you're signing on as a new person who's newer to supervisory or newer to management, one thing I would say to very start off is probably one of the most single important ingredients of your success is simply knowing how to get along with people. If that is not your forte, and it's not everybody's, that's not to kind of point fingers, but it's not everyone's forte. There are opportunities to get some training, some learning, and kind of brush up on your people skills, because maybe that wasn't part of your job, but now you're overseeing and managing people. The ability to know how to get along with them is a key. It's an important, kind of almost a make or break it. If you have a difficult time communicating with others or getting along with them, your early days as a supervisor are going to be rough, and they won't really change. So look for opportunities to grow yourself as a person, as a people person. Even if it's not your natural tendency, you can actually grow those skills. That is actually possible. So don't give up. Even if you're not the warm and fuzzy kind of manager, you can learn some of those skills and improve. But I'd honestly say one of the toughest challenges of new supervisors or managers is that managing of their peers. That is because we know workplace friendships and relationships are so important to our jobs. They reduce stress at work. It helps your communication. When you're friendly with your coworkers, it helps you get the job done because collaboration's easier working together. But again, when that relationship changes and the roles change, it can lead to some great conflict. So one of the things to remember as you transition into your new role, and as difficult as that is going to be, you have to not forget that your employees, your new employees, your former coworkers or friends, are also going through the transition. So just be very, very aware of that everyone's transitioning. So as uncomfortable it is for you, it's equally uncomfortable for them. So let's start off with this. As a new supervisor, when you're talking about managing or supervising someone who's actually a friend, and what I mean by that is, yes, some coworkers can become friends over years of working with each other, but sometimes you end up finding yourself where you're working with a friend that you had even before you might have been in this job or this position. And that gets really tricky because now you have a greater history than simply a coworker friend. This is a friend. So some of these bullet points I put out here can really help set the stage and kind of define what you need to do with these friends. And the first is setting the boundaries. And now as the boss, it's your responsibility to take the lead, take the initiative, and sit down with your friend and really set these clear boundaries. And what I mean by boundaries is you have to set the whole idea of the third bullet point, keeping the social life out of the workplace. When you're there at work, you're work. And even if it's I have to be the one who manages and you're the one I'm giving tasks and assigning work to, try to avoid, it's not possible to do 100%, but try to avoid keeping your social friendship outside the workplace. And also, I would greatly encourage you that if you want to strive and keep this friend, because that's a value to you going forward, even though now you are supervising them, when you get together outside of the workplace as now strictly just friends, avoid shop talk, avoid discussing the job. Try to really put that clear definition and clear boundary between the two. There's our friendship outside of work. Here's our working relationship. Not easy to do and very tough. Kind of a similar one to this is if anyone's worked in a family business. Talk about a difficult situation when a close family member might be supervising you, and how do you keep the workplace being that they're actually your manager, not your aunt, uncle, your mom, dad, whatever it is. I grew up in that environment, and it's really tricky to manage that, especially the one where you go home. And my parents tried to do a really good job of this with their family-owned business, is that we tried to avoid talking about work once we left the store that we owned. So again, try to keep work to work and your social to social. That's, again, not 100% going to work, but try your best you can. I mentioned this a little bit. Acknowledge and discuss this transitionary period with your friend. Be open, be transparent. Talk about how weird it is for you, how weird it is for them. Let them be able to express their concerns. But at the same time, you need to be able to express your concerns, because the last thing is, you don't want your friend to assume now that they have this like golden goose opportunity here where they can do more or get away with things, or anything that would jeopardize you establishing your credibility as a boss. So that's key. You really need to make sure there's a lot of communication, so that you can move forward on the right foot and not be stuck in this idea that they think they can get away with things. Likewise, very similarly, you need to establish that you're the authority now, that you are the boss, that you are the manager, but at the same time, not coming down too harshly. There's the balance is really interesting, is that you want to be sensitive and you want to keep their friendship, but you need to do your job as a boss. But sometimes we overcompensate and actually can be harder on our friends because, well, they're our friends, they should know better. And we cannot fall into that trap, because they still are an employee, they still are human. And just because they're your friend and have been your friend doesn't mean they can read your mind, or they should know better, or whatever their expectations. You need to keep those lines of communication open and don't have unrealistic expectations, even though someone is just your friend. But here's the fourth point on here. Prepare to be snubbed. Not all friendships, and this happens a lot, not all friendships survive this transition. It's sometimes a friend, whether it's either one, whether the supervisor, new supervisor can't trust enough or doesn't have confidence enough to keep that friend, they feel like they have to separate more, or it's a kind of the employee feeling like, right or wrong, you're better than or over them now and stuff. So there's a lot of times where you'll lose friendships, and you have to be prepared, and don't let your emotions get the best of you, but be prepared that you might lose a friend if you become their supervisor. Careful to avoid any potential perceptions of favoritism. That's why setting those boundaries up at the very beginning and trying to keep your social life out of the workplace, because again, depending on the person who's the friend, they might want to flaunt that their friends, like, yeah, my bestie is the boss, and you have to put a, I don't know, put the lid on that pretty fast. Say, no, 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 no. I am operating this on equal grounds. We will operate in a system of equality, not favoritism to any friend and whatever your history may be. So be careful that there's no perceptions of that, of any favoritism to your friend, but at the same time, don't go to the extreme and be harder on them than anyone else, because that's just not fair. One of the things that you can do really big time to help yours, especially if you're new to supervising, new to managing, is ask your organization, whether you have an HR department or your boss, if there's any opportunities for you to get some training to how to be an effective manager and supervisor. And in those trainings, hopefully they'll discuss even in more depth the idea of working with friends and former coworkers. But take advantage of those opportunities to grow yourself, to improve those skills. Maybe your boss, since they gave you the promotion, could be a mentor. At some point, I bet they went through the same transition. What did they do? What worked? What didn't? So look to them to be kind of a mentor to help guide you through this transition, but be as prepared as you possibly can. Often we just get thrust into it, and it's a really quick process, and you're promoted, and boom, you're hit the ground running. But really advocate for yourself to get the necessary skills and tools you need to be a good manager, and don't rely on just winging it. We do that far too often. We just kind of wing it and try to we'll figure it out as we go along, but that doesn't always work. So, okay, so as you proceed, don't treat your friends differently, but do in some ways. You want to keep your friend, but make sure they realize that you now have roles and responsibilities that have to be done. You can stay friendly, but you have to understand that relationship is now changed. Really, the whole idea of being a buddy with somebody at work has now ceased. You have to be a supervisor first, because that's what you're being paid to be there for. And so those kind of, again, restricting that friendship to after work hours, or just has to change in the workplace so that there's no perceptions of any favoritism or special treatment by anybody. Okay. Oh, another thing to do with friends. This is very important before I move on to the next one about coworkers. Be careful about friends trying to take advantage of that friendship. This goes back to, again, the clear boundaries, by using it to intimidate or specifically to manipulate you. In other words, you really got to be careful, and this gets really tough, again, depending on who the friend is, if they decide to use that history of a friendship against you when things get stressful or intense in the workplace. And it happens, and you have to be mentally and emotionally prepared for that to happen in case someone does get petty or is trying to literally trip you up, who can't celebrate your success and your improvement. Simply, it might be a chance where you say, okay, you know what, we're no longer going to hang out as friends. That's one of those unfortunate fracturing of friendships, but never let them try to manipulate you or intimidate you by using some kind of inside knowledge. Just nip that in the bud right away and just like, no, that's not acceptable for the workplace. Don't let those things go on. The more and more an employee feels like they can do that, they're just going to keep pushing that envelope and trying to take advantage of the situation and your relationship. So be proactive. The big thing is, and you'll see this on later slides too, is communicate, communicate, communicate. You just need to keep the lines of communication open. So, all right, so former coworkers. So this is very similar steps and tips from the friends, but there are a few differences. You really want to make sure that now talking about a coworker, you might be friendly with them, but you're not talking about the one that's really a close friend of yours. But they are people you've worked with, shoulder to shoulder, side by side for a while. So you need to give them a chance and a time to adjust. This is where the communication comes in again. Don't come in with these sweeping changes that just makes already the transitions hard enough of you being someone that you've worked with and now you're working for you. So don't jump in and just start making a bunch of changes all of a sudden and upset things even more. Kind of ease into it, but do set the boundaries. Again, you have to make sure everyone knows what your new responsibilities are. Reassure that you'll work with them and not above them. Yes, you are responsible for outcomes. You are responsible for productivity. But again, you're still that coworker they worked with. Now you just have a slightly different role. The worst thing to do is to lord it over them that you're now the boss. That is the worst way to go about it. You will lose more people and get more animosity just by doing that. It's just you're still the same person. You have a different role and responsibilities, but you're still the same person. All right. Another thing to be aware of is just because you had great relationships with your coworkers, heck, you might even been one of the ones that sat back with your coworkers and said, oh, I can't believe our boss is doing this. I know none of you probably have ever done that. And you kind of, a little complaining and moaning about this or that aspect of your job. Well, guess what? If you're the new supervisor, those comments are coming. It's inevitable in the leadership role that there's going to be criticism from your employees, even for ones you thought, oh, they always will have my back. We've worked together for 10 years. They'll always have my back. Well, you're now in a different role. And so you are not going to be immune to them griping and complaining about some of your decisions or how you operate. So brace yourself, prepare yourself to accept that criticism and be ready to hear it, and don't ever be surprised or shocked by who it's coming from, because it's just the nature of the beast, and people will do that. Keep sharing your vision. Keep meeting with them as soon as possible. When you become a new leader, meet with your team, share what you're going to do. Make sure that, in fact, in some ways, you can kind of diffuse the situation. I mentioned about the criticism of the bosses. You can diffuse it by starting off the conversation with your team of saying, well, I know we complained about these things about our former boss. Put it all out there. You all know, you said it, you talked about it together. Put it out there and say, well, here's how I envision me changing this, and trying to do better. And I would encourage you to keep the lines of communication open. You're telling your staff this, and warn me when you see warning signs of me falling into the same traps, because I want to do better. I want to do differently, and that'll be helpful. It's not always easy to hear from employees, but if you open that door for them to be able to tell you, yeah, you're getting a little bit like the things we used to complain about, at least you have the information to change, and not then you just hear the whisperings through the hallways and the water coolers about, how bad you are from your employees. So encourage and support. The more you encourage and support, you're going to get more buy-in from your former coworkers who are now working for you. If you were supportive and encouraging in your job before, don't stop doing that now because you're the boss and the leader. Keep doing it. It's the best way to build a good relationship with your employees, is encouraging and support them. So don't forget that you do have new responsibilities, and you need to keep them accountable. So in other words, you can never fall on the side of trying to be too friendly, too buddy, in the fact that you have to forget you have a role, and one of the roles is keeping people accountable and meeting certain outcomes. So don't forget you're the boss. As much as you're trying to win them over, you are still a boss, and you still have a job to do. And again, that's why you're being paid for this opportunity. So don't forget that. I mean, it's really important. But again, communication is your biggest ally. It's just, yeah. I would say too, in your preparation of taking over this kind of supervisory role, again, go back to what you liked and you didn't like about your previous supervisor, and figure out how you want to do it differently. Be consistent with your people. Once you set those boundaries, and once you've set the way you're going to operate and the way you're going to interact with them, be consistent. The worst thing is, especially when it deals with former coworkers and friends, if people start noticing inconsistencies, the whispering starts of, again, is there cronyism, is there favoritism, and you want to try to avoid that at all possible, because it really erodes your credibility when they start to suspect that some people have an inside track to the boss or whatever, and gossip can be a killer for a team. So communication is important, but that's very different than gossip. So again, keep communication going, but don't ever find yourself in a situation where you could tend to gossip. And when this criticism come, which they will, from your former coworkers or friends, make sure you address that face-to-face, one-on-one. Don't let that just hang out there and try to ignore it. It'll go away. I'll just keep doing better. Address it. And then as you address it, you're not condemning them for their criticisms, because everyone's going to criticize, but rather you can find out what the real issue is, and you can help address it and solve it. So keep those in mind. As a new supervisor, you need to deal with things head on. You need to give yourself patience for the transition. Communicate, and really try not to have your feelings hurt, because there are some people who just will not get it and can't get it. So stay humble, stay in a learning mindset, and just kind of grow. Try to grow as much as you possibly can to prepare yourself for this role. All right, changing avenues just a little bit, we're going to switch over to this scenario. You've been supervising for the last 15 years. You got this down. You know what you're doing. You haven't been promoted. You've been there and that for a while. And Some of the things I talked about as a new supervisor, you implemented some of those. Some of those you did not. And all of a sudden you find out that there's a lot of grumblings in your organization that they do think certain people who are your former coworkers have far more power or far more influence in giving you advice and whatever for your organization, and it's become a point of contention in your organization. So you're the experienced supervisor, but things have kind of started slowly going off the rails and things are breaking down. Maybe there was one of your good friends and you couldn't stand up to them. You couldn't make sure they to be able to call them on stuff, and you just kind of let them run rampant, and all of a sudden you're going, wow, what do I do now? How do I bring back the reins and get this solved? So for that experienced supervisor, my biggest encouragement is you can hit the restart button. It's never too late. You're going, okay, how do I do that? This has been going on for years. How do I rein this person in, or these people, this group of people? By doing just this, reset the boundaries. Call a team meeting, or if it needs to be a one-on-one meeting, sit them down and say, look, I've kind of made a mistake and let this go on too long. Especially if it's one particular person who has a lot of power, sit down with them and said, you know what, I've kind of given you more leeway than I should have. We need to reestablish our boundaries of supervisor and employee. I still really want your input and your feedback, and of course, I'm always open to your ideas, but it's become noticeable that sometimes I favor your ideas and your decisions over others, and we need to really show everyone that I'm trying to treat everyone equally and fairly. So resetting those boundaries, it's super tough after habits have been formed, modes of operation have been established, especially if it's been going on for a while. It's hard to reset those boundaries, but it is imperative to do so. You have to reset those things. If you don't, the inevitable outcome is going to be more and more conflict. And unfortunately, if the perception is that this one person, either former coworker or friend of yours, has that much power, when mistakes happen, you're already responsible for the outcomes, whether it's your department or organization or whatever it is. Now, if that person has so much power, perceived power, in influencing you and the organization, if they fail or screw up, any employee actually, their results come back to you. That's your responsibility as a boss. But if it's that closely tied, in other words, that friend could sink you. And I don't know about you, but in my work, I don't want one other person, I don't want anyone else responsible for my success or failure. I want to be able to be as much in control of that as I can. But when you give that kind of perception that that person's like tied to you, just to give a sports analogy, it's like the coach who has his star quarterback. They're like tied together. The quarterback does terrible, the coach gets fired. It's the coach's fault, and the guy can't play anymore. But that's the kind of, they're tied together. Or coach and general manager is another sport analogy. They're tied together. So if you find yourself in that situation, it's been going on for years, and that person's dragging you down, it's imperative that you start to nip that and start resetting those boundaries. And then the best way to keep those boundaries clear and is that consistency. You just really need to you might have multiple meetings with this person. I know we used to do it this way, but remember, we established this is the new way. There'll be a lot of speed bumps because that person, if they're kind of used to the luxury of being able to have more control, have more say, have more direct line to you as a supervisor, they're not going to want to give that up. So you have to be consistent and reestablishing boundaries and realize that there's going to be tough speed bumps along the way, and just consistently communicate. So if it's one person, make sure the rest of the staff knows that you're reestablishing this and you're kind of blazing a new trail. If it's a group, especially keep on reminding them, whether it's in staff meetings or whatever, that this is the new way. I know we've done it forever this way, but you can say we're going to change the way we do things. So remember, again, even if you want to keep on friendly terms with these coworkers and these friends of yours, you are the supervisor, you are the boss, and the buck does stop at you. So you have to be responsible as much as you want to keep that. And hopefully they'll get that. Hopefully, mature grown-ups and professional people will understand that you have a job to do. And you can't hide from the fact that you're the leader and you have to keep them accountable and keep them moving forward in the right direction to accomplish your goals. So communicate, let them vent when they need to, encourage them, communicate what your goals are, what you see as issues that could pop up or derail the whole continuity of the group. So, okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. I've been talking for almost a half an hour, and I'm going to give you a chance. Victoria's all set on her side that you have a chance. You can type in some questions. So if anyone has any questions about whether you're a new supervisor and you're looking to more tips that I didn't mention, or maybe it was a very specific situation that you want to share, or maybe you're an established supervisor going, okay, help me out. Here's my situation. How do I address this employee or whatever? So Victoria, at any point you get any questions, feel free, everyone, to type in if you have any specific scenarios you want to have me address or help you through. Go ahead and send those in. We'll pause just a second in case someone sends something in. No questions so far?
Nothing yet.
Okay, well, if no one has any, I guess we'll keep going. If something does pop up in your head, you want to submit it, you can submit it at any time, and then Victoria will look for the opportunity to just toss it in there so I can. Oh,
yep.
Great.
The question is, do you have any favorite resources for supervising or conflict?
Favorite resources? Not off the top of my head. I can find some if that person wants to make sure they leave their email address. I can find some good ones. I tend to glean from literally dozens and dozens of sources, so I don't have a go-to one. Conflict is a whole nother, that actually should be a whole nother webinar, because even though this transition is a potential conflict, that can be so much more than just this scenario. And there's a lot of good management material when you're coming to supervising. So again, get the person, make sure you send your email in, and I'll send you a list of some really solid resources.
And we've got another one. If your supervisor was demoted and you took over, then what? That previous supervisor is still employed.
Wow. That is something else. I lost my screen. Okay, there, it's back. That is something, man, that doesn't happen a ton, but I guess it would happen. That's gonna have to be a really serious sit down with that person. Talk about speed bumps and some pushback. If depending on how that kind of demotion worked, there might be a lot of anger from that person, and especially if they supervise you and now you're supervising them, that's a tough pill to swallow for some people. I think, again, you need to sit down, have the conversation, and communicate and say, all right, this is kind of awkward. Just throw it out there. This is weird. I know you were my boss, and now I have to supervise you. Give me your concerns. They might have a laundry list, whether it goes into why they were demoted and why you were promoted. They have a lot of bitter feelings. Let them vent that. Let them get that all out there. But then you have to, once they've done venting, say, okay, so how do we make this work? So instead of dictating to them exactly what you're going to do, and you're kind of going to lord it over them, well, now I'm the boss, get ready. No, instead, have them feel like they're being a partner in the solution of how do we make this work, as awkward and weird as it might be. How do we work together for the success of our jobs and to improve what we're doing here? You might even point out, I mean, this is, again, it depends on what your relationship was too. I guess if you had a strained relationship, that's going to make it even difficult. But if you had a decent relationship with this supervisor, former supervisor, just talk about the things that you really value in what they've brought to the table. And you don't need to go to the point of apologizing, because their demotion was for a reason, and that's above your pay grade in your area. But just really empathize with what they're gone through and how hard it is, and you want to make this, again, work this transition to be as smooth as possible, and to continue to use their strengths, and continue to help. And even in some ways, uh, if they had some good skills, maybe they didn't do a perfect job or they wouldn't have been demoted, but maybe there are some really good skills that you've always really respected. Try to find use for those. Try to show them that, hey, I want you to come along and partner and do those things because they were really good, and I don't want to lose that on our team. So again, you're trying to get buy-in. It's going to be hard, especially if they're bitter. It might take a lot of time, going back to that point about speed bumps. It might take a lot of time, but if you're consistent and keep reaching out to them, if they're a good employee, if they're a good professional, I think you can make that work, as awkward and hard as it is. But again, I've said it so many times already today, communication is key. Just keep talking it out, making sure that they realize that, again, even if you had run-ins with them as a supervisor, that's the past, and you're not going to hold that against them now. You're looking for the future and how the two of you can work together going forward, to be successful, and not look back of the problems of the past. All right, that person's already, unless they chose, which it doesn't happen very often, to be demoted, they're going to be wounded. So you want to try to keep their spirits up, because frankly, they could be so mad that they're going to be ineffectual in their job, or so bitter and angry about it that they stop being productive. And then now you're in the harsher role of being the corrector, to keep them accountable, and which would just make things even spiral worse. So try to get them to buy in, communicate, and be as open and transparent as possible, that you want to work to a common goal. So I hope that helped a little bit in the situation. That is very unique and very interesting. Often in leadership, when someone's removed, they're kind of removed from the picture. But to be demoted and have someone that used to work for them now go over them is very intriguing. So I'd love to hear more sometime. If you want to email, my email's at the end. I'd love to hear how that transition's working out, because that's really interesting. Any other questions, Victoria, at this point?
No more questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions, though. Hopefully I gave some answers that will be helpful, and I'll get that resources to the one person that asked for those. Now, for the last bit of what we're going to talk about today, it's a little bit long, is in case any of you are on there, like some of you may be on this webinar, I don't know who's listening to this, that says, yeah, I'm not a supervisor, Chad. I'm not a new boss. I'm not an old boss. I'm sitting here going, I'm a friend, or I'm a coworker, and that person, they're now my boss. What do I do? Which is, again, this is the other side of the coin of going, all right, yeah, it's awkward for me too. What do I do if all of a sudden my good friend or my longtime coworker is now my boss? Well, how do I transition this? So you'll see a lot of these ideas are repeated from what the supervisor is supposed to do, but in other words, why I want to tackle this is, you as the employee, you're not helpless and you're not powerless in this situation. Even if your new supervisor and your former coworker or whatever is now taking over and they don't know what they're doing, they're not listening to this webinar, they're not reading the resources, they don't know what they're doing, and they're flubbing this up, you can still take the initiative to help guide them through this transition, so at least your working relationship doesn't have to fizzle or suffer, or your social life or social relationship. So again, it's the communication. Sit down one-on-one with them to discuss, how is this going to change who we are, how we operate. Again, if they haven't come to you after a while and established this, it's in your best interest, both as a potential continuing friend, but especially as an employee, to go to them and say, all right, look, we're friends, but now I'm working for you. How does this work? How do we set this, how do we do this? So take that initiative. If they don't approach you, approach them. Find out what that expectation level is. You can ask what changes you can expect. And this, again, is both on the job, which you'll see and the whole team will see, but especially social. What does this mean socially? There might be a friend of yours or a former coworker that looks you straight in the face and says, we can't socialize anymore. I cannot deal with trying to separate the two worlds, or worried about, I'm not confident enough that others won't come back and start, criticizing our relationship or that working, and they say, I'm sorry, I have to step back. So be prepared. Be prepared that that could happen. You could have someone step back and step away from your friendship, because they cannot balance the two. So hopefully you won't take huge offense to that. But again, that's on you, but they have to do what's best for them as well. And if they feel they can't really be a good and effective boss and maintain the friendship, then that has to be a decision you have to respect too. Again, you're checking yourself as the employee. Don't be offended when there are noticeable changes, because it's a new boss, it's a new supervisor with a new way of doing things, different than your previous one. So you've gotten into the rhythm of norms for the way you operate. Well, now someone else is coming in with different ideas. Hopefully, if someone you know and is a former coworker, with some improvements even over the previous person. But don't take things personal when changes come about. That's something we can control as an employee. So check yourself, make sure you're not being overly offended when these changes that might affect the way you do your work come about. This one's a really big one. Again, their boss should set this precedence of telling you that there's no going to be these secret whisperings or closed door meetings unless it's business related. But definitely don't engage in workplace gossip with your boss. And here's a really tough one. This is why I went back to the boss establishing the boundaries of saying don't talk about work outside of work. Because if you're going, whether it's you're going out for a drink after work or hanging out at their house because you want to maintain friends, when you come back with information that's not supposed to be talked about or wherever and share it with a coworker, now again that whole perception of there's favoritism or you have an inside track, and again it erodes team, it erodes trust. So if the boss can't do it, it's really, if you want this relationship to work and be successful, you might be the one that has to tell your boss, look, we're going to leave that for work time. I really don't want to talk about this now. We're just hanging out as friends, having dinner together, whatever, but can we leave that alone? Because that might be one of the best saving things for you if they can't. So in some ways, you're coaching and leading your boss, and sometimes it's a role we have to play. But again, it's important for you to protect yourself as the employee. So there it is, avoiding any perception of favoritism. You need to embrace and accept the new reality. In other words, again, as a transition, you need to really prepare yourself. Okay, this is different. I could lose a friend. My friendship has to change, and my work might change. So there's a lot of changes. So helping yourself kind of, again, not get offended over changes, accepting this new reality, realizing that things are going to be different now. But that does not mean it has to be things will be worse, excuse me, not work, worse. It could be the new reality is much better. Hopefully it is. Because if you have some shared values and shared ideas that you had with this former coworker or friend, if they get the chance to implement them and they start to come to fruition, hopefully it's improvements. And I already jumped the gun. I talked about this no shop talk outside of work. So, well, there you go. I got too much talky there. So that's some of the things you can do as an employee. Don't be afraid to take initiative, especially if the boss does not step up and kind of help have that conversation with you about setting those ground rules and boundaries. I think you would be a lot happier as an employee to make sure, because there would be less confusion and ambiguity about what that relationship will look like and how you can maintain a friendship while still be supervised by your friend or a former coworker. So communication. You need to make sure you're talking and everyone understands things, and the way you do that is you have to communicate effectively and often. So address it. Don't just address it once, think it's going to be done. If you have some confusion or some concern, make sure you go back and have another conversation until you get it to work out to the right place where it's going to be, maybe it may never be totally comfortable, but at least it works. It can work, so you can be successful. Second chance for questions. Anyone that might be on as in the point of an employee that's working for or new to work for a friend or coworker. Anyone have any questions about that specifically? Now's your chance. I'm thinking most people came on here looking for tips on how to lead through that transition. But I just want to make sure we are aware that as an employee, you can make a difference and you can help. You can help your new boss be successful, and likewise, hopefully, your organization will be more successful. So, if no questions, Victoria?
No questions yet. If you do have a question and you're typing, we can't tell that. So you can click the raise hand button to let us know that you're typing something up. And if not, we'll move forward.
Thank you. I did not know about that raised hand thing. That's really great. Cool. All right. Well, we can always jump back to it. To be quite honest, that's what I have for you today. So I just want to kind of follow up with Victoria mentioned what we do and what we represent in our mission here at GLCYD. But here's a list of other things that we do provide. So if your organization needs some help in more than just a webinar length type of information, leadership development, board development, team building, customized trainings and consulting, all these kind of things is what we do. You can check us out on the web or Facebook. There's the information there. Or if you want to talk directly to me, like I said, ask me for some resources or some feedback or further questions if you don't get it in by the time the webinar ends. There's my email address as well. And I just want to thank you for taking time out, and hopefully this was beneficial. Hopefully it gave you some good tips on how you can either start off on the right foot in supervising your friends and coworkers, or reestablishing those boundaries as an experienced one, or if you were just an employee listening in, that you can take a proactive approach to help your supervisor be better and hopefully even save a friendship and get along, and both at work and outside of work. So from us at GLCYD, thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.